Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Ryan,
And I'm Heather.
and we are here at Confidence Through Cabaret today, talking on our Confidence with Coffee segment, all about our incredible interview with the amazing creative witch, Cindy Huang. Oh my God, wasn't this a fascinating interview?
It was certainly interesting to
Right?
hear all of the different facets of Cindy's work, being someone who is fairly academic in her career so far,
Mm.
to talking about all of the different aspects of spirituality and witchcraft. And yeah, it there was just so much to it because talking about being psychic, talking about anthropology, talking about psychometry,
Yeah.
witchcraft, and then shadow work.
Yeah.
There was a real mixed bag in this, so it
Yeah.
was a lot of fun to kind of explore all of. I mean, Cindy even talks about her tarot practice and
Yeah.
her reading of aura practice and
Yeah.
drawing of aura or painting aura. Practice.
Yeah.
And any one of those would have been a very interesting interview, but to hear them all was just incredible.
Right. And I think the really interesting, I mean, like there were quite a few points that I found very interesting in terms of like her spiritual practices, especially when she kind of talks about how she marries those with her
Mm.
very sort of, scientific based work as a psychologist and a psychology student. Her talking about shadow work, I found really quite enlightening because it's not something I've really sort of discussed or really come across before, but I know that you have a much stronger grounding in that kind of thing. Let's play this little clip, and then we can talk about it a little bit more. What do you think?
Sure, that sounds great.
Okay, right. So let's take it away with Cindy.
So I'm gonna start with shadow work and what that actually is. Shadow work, I do have to say, this is nothing very spiritual. It's psychological. It's from Carl Jung. He had developed everything to really work with the thing that you maybe don't want to touch, that's uncomfortable, but you need to touch on that. You need to recognize it and you need to work with it in order really to improve yourself. Like you improve the thing that psychologically, I don't want to say is wrong with you, but like something that's just like unhealthy for your own goods, let's just say like this.
Okay, right. So let's get into this. Shadow
Okay.
work.
Okay. So first of all, I need to know, what are you drinking before we get into shadow work?
I am drinking my Taylor's Italian roast coffee out of my absolutely favorite and very highly prized limited edition Suzy Sue Manta Ray mug.
Nice.
What about yourself?
Well, usual coffee, always coffee.
Always
Animal.
coffee. And is that an animal mug?
Coffee with animal. Okay, so I mean, shadow work is most of my corporate work is based on personal awareness. Um,
Mm.
there are a lot of tools that are used in the workplace, Myers-Briggs and Insights and TMS and Belbin. And I think I hold something like 8 licenses with Carl Jung kind of tools with
Right.
various. So these companies took Carl Jung's work
Yeah.
and looked at ways of measuring the preferences as
Mm.
described in Carl Jung's work. And they inform in different ways our preferences. So some of the work I would use with individuals that I'm coaching, talking about preferences, such as Myers-Briggs, which is a wonderful in-depth tool, but not so useful in terms of live conversation, where you might use something more like Insights or TMS or Belbin. And so, I use it in team working, I use it in individual working, I use it in coaching, as I say. But another part of, and we don't tend to go into this in the workplace, another part of Carl Jung's work is the shadow self. And I had to ask Cindy about it because she mentioned it at the beginning when she sort of
Yeah.
reeled off all the, I'm a kitchen witch and I'm a creative
Yeah.
witch and I'm a psychometrist and I'm a this, and I thought, oh wait.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I felt like I literally spent the whole interview going back to, okay, so you mentioned this one, tell us about it.
Right.
And
Yeah. Always
it was
another
just so much
layer.
fun. But so shadow self, we'll all recognize whether you've come across it or not. And Cindy describes it in very, great layman's terms, in terms of, I don't know if it's necessarily sides of ourselves that we don't like. I think that that's perhaps a little bit debatable, but it is certainly our shadow self. So if you think about the reason I'm holding this mug so closely, if you think about this, so I have a light coming in this way, right? This is what we're shedding light on.
Right.
Right. This is the typical work that I might do with a client in business.
Right.
So what are your preferences? What are your behaviors? What can we see or observe or expect and so on because we're shining a light on it. But of course, what we know is that the other side where there is no light will cast a shadow. If we were to be standing in the sun, our shadow is behind us,
Right.
well, depending which way. So wherever you're shining the light, I'm clearly not a scientist in all of this. But wherever we're shining a light, we're casting a shadow.
Yeah.
And that shadow we very often I am casting a shadow. We very often don't have an awareness of.
Right.
We're not thinking about our shadow. I can remember did you ever play this game when you were a child where you would chase you try and like jump on other people's shadows?
Right. Yeah.
Did you ever play that?
Yeah, shadow tag. Yeah, absolutely.
Was I just a horrible child?
No, shadow tag. I did that. Shadow
tag. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so you not only had to be aware of where you were and where others were, but you also had to be aware of where your shadow is.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that kind of analogy then is just, and what Cindy's talking about with the shadow work was going into that side that we tend to not shine a light on.
Right.
That we tend to, that we don't hold strongly in our conscious awareness.
Right.
So those kind of tendencies tend to be what we are less aware of or shine less of a light on, if you like, if we put it into fairly basic terms. So, when you meet somebody and they're just like, there's stuff you just don't like, there's something about it that irritates maybe the way that they communicate or something about their attitude, and you just kind of go, I don't know what it is, but I don't feel comfortable with it.
Yeah.
You ever met somebody like that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, oftentimes, and there is a significant belief that those are things that are within us in our shadow self.
Right.
That we are that the other person is holding a mirror up to. In other words, shining a light on, and we're like, so if I'm holding a mirror up to you, I can see behind me, right?
Right.
And it's the, I don't like that so much. Do you know, so people who are very impatient or very indecisive.
Yeah.
Those might be things that I think I don't like that about them, but actually it's because I don't like that about me.
I see. Yeah.
And I'm seeing it in the mirror that is you behind me.
Yeah.
Now there are a lot of young purists who are going to slate me in this because I'm trying to explain it in a way that's useful for a day-to-day discussion. Because why would we not want that? This is an academic format. This is a day-to-day discussion. And so when Cindy's talking about doing that shadow work, I loved that she was talking about taking that time during the lockdown and COVID to really kind of look at those things.
Yeah.
And it is exhausting and it is difficult, and sometimes, even oftentimes, we need support to do that.
Yeah.
Because of things we don't like to look at.
Right.
It's like peeking underneath the rocks.
Yeah, I see.
So it is important, in my view, to full acceptance of ourself. And I know that Jung talked a lot about, there's some very complicated passages, but Jung talked a lot about, as we get older, we start to embrace those shadow things and start to create more of an awareness. And remember, those shadow things are things that we aren't typically conscious or consciously aware of. We start to become more consciously aware of.
Right.
So as to why that is, there's lots of different points of view. Maybe it's because we've done the work and we're more aware. Maybe it's just because we've slowed down and we've got that reflection time. Maybe it's because we've kind of, I'm not going to say given up, but we're not like so driven to avoid those characteristics of ourselves.
Yeah.
But there would be things that you wouldn't like to look at in yourself. For example, there are a lot of effects of procrastination for me, and I find it frustrating when other people are
Sure.
doing that. And then I think, yeah, that's because I choose not to look at some of those facets of
Right.
myself.
Yeah.
And Cindy talks about control in the
Mhm.
interview with us, doesn't she?
Yeah.
And she
Yeah.
does. She's had to take a look at her control, and that's when we really start to get more awareness. We start to get more acceptance, and we start to get more kind of clarity, which allows us an opportunity to make any adjustments.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's because it's interesting because I guess, sometimes it's easy to try and perceive those as a negative, and they're
Yes.
not necessarily a negative. They're just areas that you can work with that energy in a different way, and you can embrace it and learn to embrace it in a different way.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, some of those things will be based on conditioning or beliefs. And actually, when we take a look at it later on or at other points in our life, and we do that work of
Yeah.
what is the root cause of this, sometimes it can clear up some of those things as well.
Of course. Yeah. Of course.
Yeah. But, I mean, I always, I don't know how useful this is, but I, um, I always say, my mum was always very vocal.
Right.
And by vocal, I mean she liked to shout a lot. Not in public, uh, but in private, she liked to shout a lot. And then as
Yeah.
she got older, she got more quiet.
Right.
And I always wondered if that was just kind of that becoming her shadow self and working into that shadow self.
Mm.
And now as I get older, I'm starting to notice some of the traits that I avoided or worked hard to not acknowledge.
Yeah.
If there were little cracks showing through of, little bits of light shining on them, I would go, no, and try and cover that all over, throw some moss on it, or,
Right.
put it back in darkness. And now I'm starting to come back to those things. So it's quite different to, these tend to be more of our more core personality
Mhm.
traits than things that have happened to us or things that we've
Right.
dealt with. So, I've talked a lot on here about, having dealt with various kinds of, behaviors of others that I've internalized.
Mm.
That's not really the shadow self stuff that I would want to be working on. I want to be working on who am I.
Right. Right.
um, and I think we all have a fundamental desire to be seen and accepted, but that has to start with ourselves.
Yeah.
um, Cindy does offer a really great piece of advice, which is that you have to take breaks in this work.
Yeah.
And if it is going very deep, it's a good idea to get guidance from somebody who
Licensed
knows what
trained
they're
professional.
talking about. Yeah, and I would add on to that, probably not a life coach unless they're a licensed or have been a licensed and fully trained
Sure.
um, uh, psychologist, psychiatrist, and so on. Yeah.
Sure.
Um, but I love the whole piece about shadow work because,
Right.
and here we're talking about confidence, and we're not talking about hiding ourselves. We're talking about exposing ourselves and loving ourselves
Yeah.
and allowing space for that.
Yeah.
And that's where we get to acceptance, and that's where we get to alignment, and that's where we get to deep knowing.
Yeah. Oh, I fully agree. Oh dear, that was such an interesting extract, and again, if you're watching this, if you're listening, make sure you go and check out Cindy's incredible podcast with us. It was really such a joy to be working with her and to cover all of the various things that we covered. As Heather said, everything from psychometry to shadow work. From all sorts of different disciplines, tarot and aura reading and aura painting. It really was a fascinating interview and a trip into a form of sort of esoteric work that we don't often get to talk about.
Yeah.
So it really was such a pleasure to be doing that. So make sure you go and check that out. It's available on Podbean, on Spotify, on iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. We're everywhere, literally everywhere. Deezer, all of them. And we were super excited to be featuring Cindy. So make sure you go and check this out.
Also, one more place where you can find our podcasts.
Yes.
On our website, www.confidencethroughcabaret.com. There are loads of masterclasses, there are workbooks, there are bonuses, there are documents, there are so many different things. Please go make a profile, join us on there, join us on our Facebook group, confidencethroughcabaret.com, join us on all the socials. We are all about Confidence Through Cabaret, except for on Twitter, where we are
YBYWYS.
Yes, and on Clubhouse, I am Heather. I'm at Heather YBYWYS, because I'm Heather.
And I'm Ryan.
And we are reminding you
that it's your body, your world, your
stage. Thank you for joining us. See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Bye.